Hello, Abigail here, astrologer, tarot reader, psychic medium, etc., with some thoughts about the Mercury retrograde. Fun fact, I am Mercury ruled as a Virgo rising, so it's already happening. I'm already saying things backwards and getting confused. So if any of this information is wrong, I blame my birth chart. Um, just joking. Anyways, so this Mercury retrograde is a intricate piece of a much bigger story. It is wrapped up in the wild astrology of March. There's so much going on. It starts to retrograde on March 15th, or stations retrograde rather, on March 15th, and will station direct in Pisces on April 7th. And there's just so much to get into, and there's so many like little moments with such massive impact, which is a very mercurial type of thing, where it's that little thing that kind of unravels or starts or initiates something almost seemingly unimportant, and yet when you look back you're like, wow, it was that one little detail. Like I said, I'm Virgo ruled, so it's always in the details. But that's kind of how this retrograde feels. Also, we're going to start stationing at 9 degrees of Aries, and I want to say it goes direct at 25 degrees, but don't hold me to it. But yeah, and it does that in Pisces. So we go from kind of like, I'll say average, because I have a Mercury in Aries. But it doesn't have any detrimental exaltation. There's no position that Aries has, that Mercury has in Aries. But then we get into Pisces and it's in detriment. And we also kind of have the inverse, because we're also in the Venus retrograde, stations retrograde at, our 10 degrees of Aries, right in that pocket. And then stations direct. And I know I have my degrees messed up here, and I don't think I'm going to get them right. Doesn't matter. I want to say 24 degrees, and that one I think is right. 24 degrees in Pisces. And that is a detriment Venus going into an exalted Venus in Pisces. So the kind of polarization, like I said in my other video, between these two is going to be massive. In Mercury, it's a little less so. We're going to go from like an average Mercury to a detriment Mercury, but there's definitely this pull backwards that is going to feel even more of a yank once we hit that 29th degree of Pisces. And what does this mean for us? It means that we have extra pressure in the middle of a very pressurized time. Also, the day before, we have that Virgo lunar eclipse, and Mercury rules it and is stationing retrograde as that eclipse happens. And the next day, stations retrograde. And the next eclipse, follow me here, is at 9 degrees of Aries, which I think is very telling. There's this kind of constant pull in this march back to the early degrees of Aries. April 1st, we're going to end up with Neptune entering Aries for the first time. And then eventually we're going to get Saturn entering Aries in that 0 degree place. The eclipses have been happening in Aries, for, roughly 18 months now. And this is the last eclipse. And it's just this constant pullback to this point of that Aries degree. If you have any planets in the cardinal signs from the early degrees to 10 degrees, maybe a little bit further, they're getting impacted, not just in the spring, but they're going to constantly be being called back to, with Neptune and Saturn being there for a while. And then Neptune and Saturn will retrograde back briefly into Pisces and then back into Aries. So even into 2026, we are going to be in this hot spot in the early degrees of Aries. And yeah, we have that Virgo, at 23 degrees, we have that Virgo lunar eclipse, but its ruler is at 9 degrees of Aries. So there's this constant callback, and it's been building. And we had, Venus station retrograde at 10 degrees. All this to say, this is a really impactful time, especially for cardinal signs, especially for fire signs. It's a time of doing not the hard things, but doing the challenging things, doing the things that require us to stand up for ourselves, to say enough is enough, to set boundaries. It doesn't mean we have to burn the whole house down per se, But it does mean that we do have to advocate for ourselves in this Mercury retrograde, in this Venus retrograde, and you can't really talk about one without the other because that eclipse at 23 degrees and, that 9-degree eclipse in Aries that comes on the 29th, I believe, of March, that is almost exactly those retrograde degrees. Obviously, Mercury doesn't, Mercury is not going to go quite as far as Venus, but it's not going to be too big of a difference, and also has a shorter cycle. But so much is happening in those degrees. It's also important to note that the North Node is obviously, because we have the eclipses there, is in the late degrees of Pisces. Neptune, for a couple years now, has been hanging out in the later degrees of Pisces. So it's this weird kind of like the beginning in Aries and these endings in Pisces, which also shadows the fact that Pisces is the final, degree, not degree, but the final sign of the zodiac. And Aries starts the new one. In the middle of all of this, we are going to have the spring equinox in the center of the eclipse portal. And I'm going to talk about that later in a different video about, the eclipses and all the things. But this is just so like pivotal and important for all of us. And it does feel like we're being transformed. Also, that would be, not great of me to not mention this. We recently had Mars station direct. And, it was retrograde for most of the Venus shadow period. And is still really, because Mars moves so slowly compared to the other personal planets, we're still in, the post shadow period and will be for a couple more months. And when we get to that Aries eclipse at 9 degrees, which I know it sounds like I'm putting too much detail about other stuff, but it is all interconnected. Mars will be at the same degree that it was last year during our first full moon that was eclipse free in Aries for a little bit. So it just feels like this moment, this Mercury retrograde, is this massive action point and this trigger for things to happen. Now, tons of things have been happening under the surface and around stuff, but Mercury is action, not in the sense of Mars, but it is the doing of the thing. It is the kind of like stepping out and starting on the journey. Mercury was a messenger and a traveler and a merchant, rules merchants as well. So this retrograde has a lot to do with commerce, which we don't often think about Aries and commerce. At least that's not kind of a popular thing, but Mercury is commerce. It is the trading of goods. It's kind of the passage of energy between objects and between other energies. On top of that, obviously, if we're exchanging energies, communication gets affected. Also in Mercury retrograde, because it is about language and communication. While in the Venus retrograde, yes, exes come back up. Yes, we kind of have to deal with past relationship issues, things like that. Mercury is the activation of that initiation. So not only are we going to be hearing from people from our past, they're actually going to be trying to talk to us. If you do anything in witchcraft or anything like that, this is a great time to initiate a conversation with spirit. Yes, there's room for confusion and misunderstandings, but if you're entering into this energy already knowing that that's a possibility, already knowing that that's a thing, there's actually a wealth of things you can do during a time like this. Something that I think this time is great for is past life work. If we are rectifying the past, what better time to do that than a Venus retrograde, a Mercury retrograde, on that threshold of the beginning and ending of the zodiac, on that threshold of endings and beginnings to start something new. Is it going to be a normal beginning? Is it going to be smooth? No, that's just not that energy. But the energy of progress is not smooth. I think sometimes, often in astrology, we're looking at for the right time in the context of what is the easiest. And as someone who has detriment planets and also things in the hidden houses where I have to do a lot of work, the best time is not always the easiest time or the most effective time. Ease is beautiful, and it's just something I crave in my own life and I try to make space for. But when it comes to doing things, ease doesn't always give you the results. And I'm not talking about that in the context of capitalism and forcing yourself to labor and etc. But If you want to move forward, you need traction. So, squares, retrogrades, difficult placements, you will be able to get your heel into the ground and push when you hit energy like this. And it doesn't mean that you need to activate everything. This energy has a mind of its own and it will do its own thing. But if you're able to infuse your intentions and to trust the universe, a lot of really amazing things can happen. It's not easy, it's exhausting. I'm just going to say that. But a lot of amazing things can happen in eclipse season, in a Mercury retrograde, in a Venus retrograde. The eclipse portal is going to be intense. As I'm recording this, we are on the threshold of that, kind of the full force of it. We've been feeling it as we walk up to it because energy doesn't just start and stop, but we're being walked into this really intense energy. And I think Mercury being retrograde allows us to have new perspectives. It allows us to take a step back and to ask what we really want and how we really desire to be. I think once we get into Mercury and Pisces, and this is what I encourage anyone who has a Mercury and Pisces or anyone who, struggles with Mercury Pisces transits, um, don't expect words to be the most effective thing. They just don't function the same way. A Mercury in Gemini, or even just a Mercury in, I was about to say Sagittarius, but that's detriment too. Um, LOL. Or, a Mercury and we find someone who's neutral. A Mercury in Taurus, very practical Mercury in Capricorn. Words don't function the same way in water signs, but especially in Pisces where it's like detriment and fall because it's like double powered over in Virgo. It's don't expect to communicate the same way. Communicate through pictures, communicate through sound, communicate through music and unspoken things. Once we hit that midpoint, when we go back into Pisces, which will be, well, yeah, it's going to be somewhere around, it's going to be somewhere right before the final eclipse in Aries. But don't expect it to work the same way. Don't expect to have the same kind of friction as you do in Aries. Well, Aries doesn't have, like I said, any particular exaltation or domicile. Fire signs are a very effective place to have Mercury, just in the sense of like the mere volume and passion of the words that you use. So don't expect to have that once we get into Pisces. Allow things to cycle and to change in this moment. It's going to happen between the eclipses. We don't have any control. And my best advice, which I always joke about this with other astrologers because everyone wants something really detailed, and I'm a Virgo rising. So you would think I would be highly complicated and maybe overdo it on this. It is literally just to sit with it, to trust the universe, to buckle up. If you want to do anything practical in a moment like this, just start clearing space, releasing what you can release, because the universe is going to bring in something that you probably can't even imagine. And if you're solely relying on your ability to physically manifest something in your own brain, you might miss out. You might miss out on something, especially in a Mercury retrograde. So, sorry, I'm getting the morning gunk is kind of coming down. So, in this Mercury retrograde, within the context of the Mercury retrograde, you really got to trust a whole lot. And I know it sounds overly simplified and it sounds maybe like I'm not taking it seriously enough. I do absolutely. The next few weeks are going to be absolute pandemonium and chaos for me, and not in a fun way, but I know that the universe is bringing in something good, and I know that this Mercury retrograde is kind of that final peeling back on all of this energy that is going to allow us to really, really transform. It's not going to be an easy transformation. We're not going to fit in the same places that we fit before this eclipse cycle happened. That is if we trust the universe, that is if we work with it. So with this Mercury retrograde, what can you do to be more effective? I think on the front end, don't judge yourself. Don't judge, like obviously take responsibility for your actions, but don't judge the expression of your needs. In Aries, it's a lot about the expression of needs. the expression of desire, the expression, just the initiation and the expression and the kind of presence of a raw feeling, of a new feeling, of something that is uncut and untrimmed and isn't kind of socially acceptable. Let yourself be not socially acceptable in the beginning parts of this Mercury retrograde. Say what you need to say and don't edit yourself. Now, when I say don't edit, I don't mean say hurtful things because you are triggered. Some people might get hurt, but that's not going to be because you were mean. They might get hurt because you're setting boundaries. They might get hurt because you're now able to say, hey, you did X, Y, and Z to me, and that wasn't very nice. And if we can't find a way for you to stop hurting me, I will have to remove myself. Um, and yes, it can be more feral, it can be more raw than that. This is just how I tend to trim down my Mercury in Aries kind of word soup. But allow yourself to be angry and feral at the beginning of this, cycle. And once we go into, Pisces, then allow it to become wordless and allow it to kind of flow out of you through emotions, dig into music. My pro tip for a moment like this, especially since we're pairing it with a Venus retrograde, find some kind of media to enjoy. I tend to enjoy erotic writing during, I'll put it that way, erotic writing during Venus retrogrades specifically, and top in Aries retrograde on a little Mercury retrograde in Aries on top of that. Um, and when this all started, Mercury was in Pisces. It's in the form of graphic novels because it's more than just the words. It's imagery, it's the colors, the characterization, all of those very Piscean things, that the intangibles that become so tangible when we, put pictures to something. And that doesn't have to be what you pick for this. You can also, it doesn't have to be erotic if you don't want it to be, but why wouldn't you? But find something to kind of dig into, to escape into when energy is so pressurized. Finding an escape, especially through art and media and music, is really important. So, what is your, you know, little pill of choice? And it's okay in these moments to get a little caught up in it, to lose yourself a bit, to get obsessed. Um, I think so often in society, we're always looking for like the most functional for labor way to do things. Like, if it gets in the way of work, it's bad. If it gets in the way of production, it's bad. Become obsessed, obviously within a healthy, reasonable frame. But become obsessed. Allow yourself to indulge. You're going to be doing so much energetically that you will need an escape to go into, especially when both Mercury and Venus are retrograde in Aries at the same time. Once we get into Pisces, I do think that exalted Venus is going to kind of loosen things up a bit. Find something to be obsessed about. Like I said, within reason, within health, but find some kind of media to really dig into. Is it a book series? Is it a kind of movie? Maybe you have a list of stuff you wanted to watch, but you've been like watching your screen time. Break it. You can watch your screen time after the Mercury retrograde, but enjoy yourself. If you can't do anything functional and you really just need downtime, take it. There's absolutely no reason to pressure yourself to accomplish something in this season. I've had so many people be like, oh my gosh, Abigail, I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you. And I only really mind if we have something scheduled and you don't tell me. And I'm like, as long as it wasn't like there wasn't a time frame, I don't expect anyone to get back to me right now. Am I still on top of things? Yes. It's all that earth energy, guys. And on top of things, crying in the background, typing my little emails, and then disappearing into a manga. That's what's happening. So don't expect anything of yourself when it comes to progress. Don't force yourself to do things. What I usually find in retrogrades is At some point, depending on your own personal chart, you will have a breakthrough and you will feel that progressive flow maybe before the end of the retrograde, maybe right after. I find with Venus retrogrades, my kind of percolating period is like a month after. Um, Mercury retrogrades, it's usually right after the Kazemi that I get a little like, oh, I can do things now. That's great. Don't push yourself. There's so much going on. We're in an eclipse portal. A lot of wild stuff is going to happen. A lot of the stuff that you're working on now isn't going to matter. Um, After the next couple of weeks, you're going to either have to redo it or it's no longer a priority, or you've changed so much that you got to start over. And while that might seem stressful and overwhelming, you're going to start over ahead of where you were before. It feels weird because you're going to be like, well, then why? If I'm starting over, then I'm starting from day one. You're not starting from day one. You're you have tons of experience behind you. You've already done things before, but now you have a bunch of new, fresh perspectives and direction and ideas that are going to flow so much easier. So don't look at it as a failure. Don't look at it as regression, even though it is. Look at it as I'm glad I know this now. And what I did before wasn't unnecessary. It set the stage for me to be able to be like, I know what I've done. Now I can improve on it. So that this doesn't get too long, because I was doing voice notes to my sister and literally was off the rails yesterday with like a 10-minute long voice notes. So this Mercury stationing retrograde is getting me good. Um, you know, don't take anything too seriously. And yeah, it's very serious. For my own personal life, it's wildly serious. It's like make or break big moments of like, if I pick one way versus another, I know absolutely that this is a moment where my life will never be the same. And if I pick a different path, it's going to be a completely different life. Um, but we can't control that. And in moments like this, it is about trusting the universe and also about trusting yourself. You can only do what you can do within the parameters of the information that you have. Mercury retrograde. You don't have all of it right now. What will be will genuinely be. And you really have to dig in and trust. I do think that digging in and trusting is going to get easier once we're out of Aries, because that kind of Martian need to progress while also being dragged, kicking and screaming backwards is hard. But once we get into Pisces, I definitely think we'll be able to percolate a bit more. Also, we're going to get a bit of an anchoring from Saturn. And while I've been blabbering about everything else, we're also going to have that Neptune conjunction again, that North Node conjunction again, and we'll be back cozied up next to Saturn. So we'll be revisiting all of those points that we visited a couple of weeks ago when we were going direct. And there's a lot of really good stuff happening with that Saturn. And when I say good, I don't mean easy. And when I say good, I don't mean simple. It's very complex and it's very difficult. But Saturn is doing what it does best. It is getting in there. It is breaking down the foundations that were already shaky and clearing the way for us to rebuild in a healthier, more constructive way. And in Pisces, we don't get a whole lot of visibility on what that Saturn is doing. But with this retrograde, that retracing of steps is allowing us to get a little peek into what Saturn has really been up to in Pisces for all this time. So have hope, have faith, find something you can obsess about that is artsy. It might be a handcraft. I will say if there's any pressure behind it, maybe not the best obsession to have. It needs to be something that you can literally lose yourself in. So books and writing and art and literature and media of any kind. I'm always about moderation, but in this kind of energy, we're going to need something to escape to. And the escape is very much, I think, going to be of the creative kind. And it's going to be some kind of fantasy, whether it be fiction, whether it be actual fantasy or sci fi, just a different world to escape to when things get a little too much on this side. And I know we're often taught don't escape, force yourself to do the thing. Y'all, we do that all the time. Let yourself go. Enjoy the stuff. Be fanciful. Um, Another way to express yourself during this, because you can't really talk about the Mercury retrograde without Venus retrograde. Um, Try some different stuff. Try different things. And everyone's like, don't cut your hair during this time. And my thing is like, don't cut your hair if you know that getting a bad haircut or getting a different haircut will upset you. I have very fast growing hair, so I can do a lot and be like, it'll be fine in a couple of months. But do something different. Try something fanciful. If you don't want to cut your hair, maybe get little clip in extensions to try it out or do some temporary dye. It is a time to fantasize and escape and also be brave. Like, unless you're getting cosmetic surgery, a lot of stuff will just grow back. Unless you're doing cosmetic surgery, trying a different makeup is not going to harm you. Um, so yeah, have fun within the context of everything seeming to be burning to the ground. Remember that commerce is going to be affected. The trade stuff we're dealing with in the US is really gonna get a little more crazy. You think it's crazy now, wait till Mercury stations retrograde. um, Communications are going to be garbled. We're not going to know too much what's going on. Also, hold tight for that Kazemi. Kazemi's going to have a lot to say um, about people's intentions and that they're kind of raw desires. Um, an Aries, of course. So have faith. I do feel like this was really rambly and probably really confusing. Y'all, I can't do anything about it. We're in the Mercury retrograde. This is what happens to me. I also get more self conscious during Mercury retrogrades, which I find funny because that is the time when I should probably care the least. Yeah, take care of yourself. Check out where these, transits are happening. Know that this is kind of an action point for 2025 and into 2026. So the themes that we kind of keep seeing over and over again are going to be the ones they're going to continue to keep, reappearing. And I know I'm groaning and crying internally too because I really just want this to be over. Um, Anyways, my loves, I will have something out on the Virgo eclipse. I will continue to keep you posted on the energy and what's happening. I will say this Mercury retrograde, Venus retrograde eclipse portal moment is really great for past life work. If you're doing past life rectifications or been thinking about it, now is the time. Doesn't have to be me. I do it through Reiki. You can be anyone. But yeah, it's a great time for any kind of reading. It's a great time for any kind of problem solving that doesn't require immediate action. It's time to kind of take stock of things, but not technically have the ability to do anything. However, I do feel once we're on the other side of all this energy that we've been like absolutely building up towards since last year with that Mars retrograde, things are really going to start to break big time in the summer, especially when Uranus moves into Gemini. That air energy is going to pick things up. Anyways, my loves, happy Mercury retrograde. And, it isn't going to be easy. It's not going to be simple, but it is going to be enriching and it is going to, while it may feel like we're being torn apart, it is going to prepare us to be stitched back together and to be built up in such a way that we won't have to do things again this way. We might have to do them a different way. We won't have to do them this way if we learn our lessons. All right, I love you all, and I will see you in a different space and time. As always, please subscribe and pop any questions in the comments. I love to hear from you all.